Hi everyone, it's Leah Simpson with the University of Kentucky's Office of Assessment. In this video I want to talk to you a bit about how you might create what we call an A+ Improvement Action Plan. Improvement Action Plans are the yearly assessment reports that all academic and some non-academic programs must turn in via Blackboard. These are the ones where you detail the outcomes that your program assessed, the ways in which that was completed, and the results of that assessment. But before you complete your report, it's important for you to know who might look at it. First and foremost, these reports are for you and your peers. The Office of Assessment encourages you to share your assessment data within your department so that everyone knows what's been done and the plans for moving forward. Assessment should be program-wide and include all of the people who are responsible for the program's success. Second, accrediting bodies might be looking at your assessment reports. SACS reviewers are certainly going to have access to all of this data, but if your program is accredited by a separate accrediting body, then you might want to also share these reports with them as supplemental information. And finally, the university's leadership, the Office of Assessment, and the UAC will be reading through your reports. In case you're unaware, the UAC stands for University Assessment Council. There's at least one representative from every college, as well as student affairs, undergraduate education, and UK libraries that sits on this committee. If you want more information about the UAC, please just visit the Office of Assessment's website. Now obviously, there are several groups that might be reading your assessment information, and perhaps there's only one or two of those groups that's going to have any real understanding of how your program runs. So remember that when you write your report. It's unlikely that a UAC reviewer will be familiar with your program's specific jargon or processes. So for that reason, you might want to be a little more descriptive in your writing of your report. What might be obvious to you and your peers may be very confusing for an outsider. Now the second step to writing a high-quality improvement action plan is to get to know your rubric. If you haven't taken the time to review the rubric, please do so in advance of writing your yearly report. You can find it on the Blackboard Outcomes Resources page, which you can link to from the Office of Assessment's website. Look over the requirements of the rubric and use it to help you complete all the necessary parts of the report. To find the rubric on our Outcomes website, just go to our Outcomes tutorial page and you should see the rubric right there. Now there are a few areas of the rubric that I want to emphasize. First is methodology. We don't ask that you write us a book, but it is important that you give your audience enough information so that they can understand not only how you completed the assignment, but why you chose to complete it in that way. If the faculty in your program assessed a paper from class 247, it might help readers to understand why 247 was the appropriate class. It's also important to tell readers how you gathered your evidence. When you say you assessed that specific paper, did you assess all of the papers from students in that class, or did you assess only a sample of the papers? And if so, how did you find your sample? Did you use a rubric or a scoring guide, or were the papers assigned a grade at the reviewer's discretion? Here's an example of what this might look like. The one at the top is not at all an unusual response in the reports, but you can see it really gives reviewers very little information about what actually took place for the assessment. A better example is on the bottom. In two short paragraphs, we can gather that the course where the assessment took place was class 247, the reason why the course and the assignment were both the appropriate one to evaluate, and that the number of students in the course and the number of evaluations that took place were the same. We also can see what process was used to evaluate. They used a 4-point holistic rubric. Another area of the reports that often needs to be beefed up is the analysis section, which we're actually now referring to as interpretation of results. In your reports, it's important to explain why you and your peers believe that the results were what they were. Often what we receive in this area is a simple restatement of the results, but what we'd rather know is if your faculty found the results odd or confusing, were they happy with them or troubled by them? Do they have any ideas or suspicions about why these reports were what they were? Now again, you can see on the top an example that's a common response to this area, but at the bottom there's an example of what might be a more appropriate response. It's not uncommon at all for me to talk to faculty and have them tell me all of these things that they discussed once they saw the results of their assessment, and yet they don't share any of this rich conversation in their report. This conversation needs to go in your report, so please put it in there. It really helps reviewers understand what you are doing and how you're making decisions. So now let's talk about action. We call this the Improvement Action Plan because it's expected that your program will take action to improve. Something that needs to happen in order for your program to get better. And even if your program is doing really well, there's always going to be room for an improvement. Even the #1 programs in the country work to improve. Otherwise, they're not going to stay #1 for long. So explain in your report what steps your program is going to take to get better. Are you going to change your curriculum? Will you offer new services? If you're happy with your results, it might be a good time to investigate your benchmarks. Perhaps you should set the mark a little bit higher. And finally, think about when you plan to review this outcome again. Ideally, you'll only change a few things at a time. It's important once you make changes to give them a bit of time to start working. So if you make changes to your curriculum, it might take a time or two teaching that new curriculum for everything to really mesh. Our goal isn't to have you change everything every single year. So make a change here or there, and then set a plan in place for reviewing that action and change to see if it had any impact that you were hoping for. Requirements for the Improvement Action Plan can be found at the bottom of the rubric. So note when you see those details in the plan, who's going to be responsible for carrying out this action? What's the time frame for putting it into place? These are the types of things that we want to know, and that can be shown in our poor example versus our better example. The better example, again, is at the bottom, and we get a bit more detail about what's taking place, who's responsible for that, and when that's going to happen. Finally, think about whether or not you've properly told your story. A good improvement action plan is one that both your peers and outside reviewers can understand. It needs to give enough detail so that someone who's not involved in the assessment process can replicate it if they desire to do so. And it should give all the right background information about why the assessment took place, who was involved, and how decisions were made going forward. So remember, to write an A+ improvement action plan, you need to give enough information so that all your decisions and activities are explained. But it needs to be short enough to be read in one setting. We don't need you to write 60 pages of a report. A few well thought out paragraphs in each area is probably sufficient. And as always, if you have any questions about this or other assessment topics, please contact me in the Office of Assessment. Thank you.